Today's episode is brought to you by Mazars. SoundCartel. Everyone's going through it right now, and you might need some support to refocus, particularly if you manage people, because how can you lead others if you're struggling to lead yourself? From SoundCartel, I'm Nicole Goodman, and this is Business Essentials Daily. Mike Goldman is a leadership team coach, speaker and author of the #1 best-selling book, Breakthrough Leadership Team. And with more than 30 years coaching and consulting, his mission to help CEOs develop their teams and grow their businesses is as strong as ever. He breaks down the ways in which leaders need to put their oxygen masks on first, before being able to lead a team effectively. So I start by asking Mike, what really is self-leadership?
By self-leadership, what I'm getting at is that in order to lead others, in order to even be part of a great team, the first thing you need to do is lead yourself. And I break that down into 3 things that I believe are very important. Number 1, I call fire. Fire is all about keeping that fire burning in your belly and striving for more. The second is focus, the ability to be proactive in shifting from a disempowering focus to an empowering focus. And then the last thing is coachability, the ability to keep learning, growing, ask for feedback, hold yourself accountable for that feedback. So I think it's those things: fire, focus, coachability.
So then it might sound obvious, but why then is self-leadership so important to building a great leadership team?
You can't be part of a great team. You can't lead others if you're not leading yourself. If you are letting what's going on at home, impact you too much at work, if you are letting the challenges we all face at work impact you to a level that you can't be there for your peers at work. You can't be there for the folks that report to you if you're a leader. You can't be there with your head on straight for your clients, then everything else falls apart. You can have great processes, great techniques, great strategies, but if you are just not at your best every day, you're not going to be able to make those things happen.
Can you talk a bit more about those 3 elements of self-leadership?
Sure. So the first one I call fire, and the metaphor I like to use is we need to find the next dragon to slay. We've all been at points in our business or our career when we've achieved something and it ought to make us feel great, but for some reason it doesn't feel the way we thought it would feel. Getting that nice new car or having that big new house or getting your business to a certain level or making a certain amount of money. The journey feels great, but getting there never quite feels the way we think it's going to feel. We always need that next thing because it's the journey that's so important. So I always coach myself and coach others to identify what's that next thing that scares you a little bit, or maybe scares you a lot. What's that next dragon to slay? So that's the fire piece, is making sure you've got that next mountain you're going to climb or that next dragon you're going to slay. When I talk about focus, I'll give you a few examples. I talk about making a focus switch from a disempowering focus to an empowering focus. One example might be shifting from thinking you will be happy when I make some amount of money, when I finally have kids, when the kids finally leave the house, shifting from I'll be happy when to I'll be happy now. Or it might be shifting from believing the things that happen to you, some of those hardships that happen to you, believing that those just randomly happen to you, poor you, to believing that there's a purpose for all that. So in my work, I talk about 5 different focus switches. Those are 2 of them, but that's why focus is so important. And then on the coachability side, it's really about having the vulnerability to ask for help. It's having that accountability to receive that help, receive that feedback, and actually do something about it. It's about learning and growing constantly. So that's why those three things I believe are so critical for self-leadership.
In your book, Breakthrough Leadership Team, you talk about the locus of control. What is that and why is that important?
The locus of control is one of those focus switches. And by the way, the word locus is just a fancy word for center or point. So you can have an external locus of control. That means the world is happening to you. An internal locus of control says, I make things happen. I happen to the world. So an external locus of control would take all the things that are happening in your business or your life, and with an external locus of control, there'd be a tendency to blame that on other people, on the economic environment, on COVID, on the government. And as long as you have an external locus of control, you're blaming others, you're not going to solve the problem. Until you could make that switch from external to internal, which could be as easy as asking yourself an empowering question like, what is within my control? So when COVID hit and there was a lockdown and my newest book came out a week after the world shut down, I thought that was going to get me on a whole bunch more stages to do public speaking. Every stage in the world shut down. When my book was published, I could have said, well, I can't build that part of my business because of COVID. That would be an external locus of control. I took an internal locus of control and I said, what am I in control of? Well, I am in control of how I use this to diversify my business even further. And I wound up with a much stronger business post-COVID than pre-COVID. So that's the locus of control, shifting from an external locus to an internal locus.
Well, Mike, you've just mentioned there is so much change happening in the world right now. We've all gone through it and at speed. On top of that, what advice would you give leaders who are feeling overwhelmed by everything?
When folks feel overwhelmed, they typically think it's a time management problem. I've got too many clients, I've got too many employees, I've got too many issues, I've got too many responsibilities. It's not a time management problem. And I believe that, and I know that because when we have less of all those things, now we're stressed we don't have enough clients, we don't have enough opportunities, we don't have enough employees. It's not a time management problem, it's a focus problem. We've all, at least I'll speak for me, there have been times where I have felt overwhelmed by tiny little things where, I've got to create this expense report to get paid for my expenses. And, oh my God, how am I going to get that done? I'm overwhelming. That's not a time management issue. And there are other times I am crazy, crazy busy, but I'm not overwhelmed at all because I'm loving every minute of what I'm doing. So if it's not a time management problem, what is it? And again, it goes back to focus. I believe it's a focus problem. And one example of another one of those focus switches is when we have a focus on what we don't want. I don't want that project to fail. I don't want that employee to leave. I don't want to have a problem with that client. I don't want to have problems in my marriage. When we're focused on what we don't want, it causes overwhelm and frustration. And making a simple but profound switch from focusing on what you don't want, which is pretty disempowering, just like if you're racing a car and you say, I don't want to hit the wall, you're probably going to hit the wall. You get what you focus on. So making that switch, and what I do with my clients when they're overwhelmed is I ask them again, it's another very simple question. When they're focused on what they don't want, I will say, what do you want? And when I ask them that question, there is normally an uncomfortable silence, like I have asked them the most difficult physics equation in the world, because they're so focused on what they don't want and what they're angry about, what they're frustrated about. Saying, what do you want, shifts their brain. And now they start thinking about what they want, and in listing out the things they want, they start to get way more creative on how to go out and get those things. And all of a sudden, their time management hasn't changed. The number of things in front of them haven't changed, but they go from feeling overwhelmed to feeling hopeful and creative.
That was Mike Goldman, leadership team coach, author and speaker. To find out how Mike can transform your team or to order his book, Breakthrough Leadership Team, head to mike-goldman.com, or you'll find all the links in the show notes of this episode. This episode of Business Essentials Daily is produced by the team at SoundCartel. Thanks for listening. I'm Nicole Goodman. We'll bring you more Be Daily tomorrow. Follow @BE Daily Podcast across social media and head to bedaily.com.au for more from the Business Essentials Daily podcast. SoundCartel. This episode was brought to you by Mazars. To find out more, visit mazars.com.au. That's mazars.com.au.